on David Pendleton. He's a comic ventriloquist. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing great. Doing great.
Fantastic. So, could you go ahead and kind of give us an introduction on how you found Vent or how Vent found you?
I started doing ventriloquism when I was about 6 years old. I had the Jimmy Nelson Instant Ventriloquism album that my grandmother gave me. My very first exposure to ventriloquism, I was at a friend's house, and of course I barely remember this. I think I was like 5 years old. But he had a Danny O'Day dummy, toy figure, and the kind with the string in the back of the neck. And I was totally intrigued by that. There was just something about it that just captivated me. So I played with that, and then I asked for one of those for Christmas or my birthday, and it was my grandmother that gave me actually a Charlie McCarthy puppet. Same thing, the Juro puppet with a string in the neck, when on my 6th birthday. And so she also found the Jimmy Nelson album, and I started listening to that album, and of course was also very intrigued by ventriloquists that came up on television. And people would point out to me as a youngster who the ventriloquists were. I learned about Edgar Bergen, of course, and Paul Winchell and those guys. So I started very young, and nobody thought that I would keep it up, but it's something that I kept doing.
What made you pursue it?
Well, I memorized the script that came with the record album, and I did a little talent show for Cub Scouts that I was involved in. And there were just a lot of people that gave kudos and accolades after that talent show. And I just thought, oh, this is something that I might be kind of good at.
That's fantastic. So what age were you when that? Were you a teenager? Or were you younger?
I was 8 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's awesome.
That was probably my very first performance on stage in that talent show when I was 8. And I just did the script that came with the record album verbatim, because I knew nothing about writing or creating a show or anything like that. So
that's fantastic. Well, I'm also taking questions from that we get from Facebook. We have one question right here from Dan Satchoff saying, "Any truth to the rumor that Tilly has COVID?"
Well, we have been practicing social distancing, so she is not letting me come near her, and she is in the high risk category. She hasn't been tested, but she has been talking to me about possibly injecting herself with Lysol just to make sure.
Well, you have an animatronic puppet, which is great for the whole 6 feet away thing.
Yeah, that is true. That work. And I thought about pulling him out. Yeah, I'd have to kind of put him together and get all the radio for this, but I didn't.
Could you talk about him, because he's a beautiful work of art and mechanics kind of put together?
Yeah, I came to Ray Gwill years ago and gave him the vision for this puppet. And Ray was the one that did the original sculpt.
Okay.
And worked on him. And this was the very last figure that Ray actually built.
Wow. And
actually, he didn't complete it. It was still in process. Ray was kind of known for taking his time on projects. But Austin Phillips and I actually went to Ray's bedside the very weekend, actually, that he passed.
Wow.
And Ray called Barbara, his wife, over and kind of took all the pieces and parts that he had made so far of this puppet, Sergeant Major Boorah. Yeah. And he just kind of had him on his chest. Barbara kind of brought the pieces, and he was in a hospital bed in his home, in his living room. And so Ray called over Austin and then basically handed him the pieces and said, Austin, I want you to finish this, that you need to finish this for David.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a really, really profound moment. And, all of us were just weeping, when that happened. So Austin took Boo-Ra and completed him. And he and I worked together. Austin had never done anything with servos and that sort of thing. And I spent several years trying to come up with a design that would work. The challenge with a figure like that when you're using servos, because a servo just controls one axis. It's basically just a little thing that does this. And so we had to come up with a 3-axis movement for the head so that the head could not only nod and move like this, but then of course also turn. So those are the 3 axes. So
I love that attention to detail too, because most animatronic puppets that you see, it looks like something from Chuck E. Cheese where it moves in one direction.
Yeah.
And so I love that you guys put that attention to detail into copying that movement that is natural in aspects of puppetry.
Well, I wanted him certainly to look lifelike, and it is true. The simplest thing that, people of course go with simplicity, and I understand that when they're trying to create something that they can control remotely. And the simplest thing, of course, is to just have one servo that, makes the head turn. But that's what it ends up looking like, is this very mechanical, one-axis movement. And I came up with the design to also incorporate this, but realize that unless you have this going on, you really don't get the realism that you want. So yeah, that took some time to design that. And then of course the other movements are pretty straightforward. The mouth is just a single servo and the eyes and that sort of thing. So
where did the idea for the sergeant character come from?
Well, I was doing a writing session with a friend of mine, Robert G. Lee, who's a really incredibly talented comedy writer. And we were exploring different character ideas. And really, it was Robert that kind of came up with the character initially as he was basically interviewing me, just talking to me about, what are the things that you're passionate about, this sort of thing. And I think I thought it would be really cool if we had a character that was a little bit more offbeat. And the concept behind him is that he would make snide comments from, off to the side. And so I would be doing my regular act and he would be, making these insults and snide comments along the way. So, and that is still very much in process. I've used him on stage and it's gotten good response, but I still really need to hone material, which, as you well know, Landon, is the biggest challenge with what we do. So
yes, definitely. Well, it's neat. I had seen a video somewhere of you performing with Tilly and the sergeant in the back, and it's neat because you look at the sergeant and but you forget that he's there, and then because you're focused on you and whatever character you have out, and then he makes a quip, and it's really great. So kudos on that idea, because that's definitely a different thing that I've seen done in this aspect of ventriloquial performance. Looking back at some of our comments we have from our Facebook Live, Dale Brown commented, "What has the convention meant to you?" And then Dan Satchoff commented, "What has Dale Brown meant to you?" So I guess you can put those in the same.
Well, actually, those two things are very related. Dale Brown was one of the first people that I met as a 13-year-old at the Ventriloquist convention.
Wow.
And he pulled me aside and just, got to know me, asked me questions about my life and, how did I get interested in ventriloquism? And I had purchased a Craig Lovick figure, and he actually had a Craig Lovick figure that he was using at that time.
Oh, wow.
And we kind of compared notes, and it was just so fun for me to meet somebody. And this was somebody older than me that really just kind of took me under his wing. And that was delightful for me to meet people like Dale that really took an interest in, the young kids like me. and gave advice. And I believe at that time, Dale was just starting to go pro. Like he had been doing ventriloquism, he had put together an act, and he had been using it to do parties and, you know, the things that people will do when you're just getting
Sure.
started. But I think that that was the era, or just about within that era, that Dale was making that choice to, like, you know, quit the day job and completely go pro. I'm going to go full time,
Yeah.
which was a big step. So I got to listen in. I listened in on his conversations with other older ventriloquists about that process, and it was just cool that's what made the ventriloquist convention so meaningful for me, is just being included in the gang, you know, in the community. So,
yeah, definitely. I remember my first convention. It really is a family. Everyone's so welcoming, and you know, you see the professionals helping the newcomers and the junior mic contests and everything, and Dale Brown and Bob Isaacson and all those figures in the event community were very helpful and very welcoming. We have another question here. It's Michael Dawkin commented, David, at what age did you decide to focus on gospel ventriloquism?
So I was in college when basically as we would say, when I gave my life to Christ. And really, I made that decision in high school, but it was not something that really took until I got to college. I got involved in a Bible study with Campus Crusade for Christ and started just spending time with other believers, and really started to get more serious about my faith. And Campus Crusade for Christ is an organization that exists on college campuses all over the country. Really strong emphasis on, you know, sharing your faith, talking to people about what it means to know God personally through faith in Christ. And I was doing ventriloquism at that time. I had been doing it all through high school, and, you know, the typical birthday parties and various, you know, banquets and events that that are opportunities when you're at that age.
Sure.
And so I just had a group of friends that kind of challenged me to think about, I wonder if there's a way that you can actually use your ventriloquist act to also share a message. And that's when I honed that. Well, that's when I began to hone or really think about how I might use that as a way to also build a bridge to talking about spiritual things.
Wow.
So
That's amazing. I love that. So how long were you in that group until that kind of?
Well, I was a freshman when I got involved with Campus Crusade, and then I slowly moved up the ranks in student leadership in the organization, in the group, you know. And so all 4 years of college. And then when I graduated college, I actually came on staff with Campus Crusade. I went into the campus ministry and was just your regular Joe campus staff guy. Kent State University was my first assignment. But I was still doing ventriloquism on the side. It's funny, I was telling that story to a friend of mine who's a comedian, and said, you know, I was doing ventriloquism on the side, and he stopped me and he said, wait, isn't technically all ventriloquism done on the side? Which I thought, why have I never thought of that before?
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, then the ventriloquism just started to take over. I got calls from people saying, hey, can you come do an event on our campus? We'd love to have you, you know, do something that's connected with our fundraising event, and, you know, one thing after the other. Now, it was also during college that I landed the job working at Kings Island in Cincinnati. And
oh, wow.
So that was how I think I really honed my craft, or at least my skills as a performer, because you're performing every day. And I did 6 short shows a day, 6 days a week. So
wow,
you can't help but to get better. And of course, it's a fresh audience that comes every time to the show. So that was also a big part in helping to form me into a full-time working performer.
So did you have music in your act then, or was music something that you added later on?
No, I put it in my act.
Okay.
Even then, music is great because it's a good filler, right?
Yeah.
if you don't have this, string of funny material, at least you can do something with a song that kind of fills time. And also, I was working at a theme park. It's, music is kind of expected with that genre. You know what I mean? There's just music that's
Sure.
very much involved with shows like that, the variety shows.
So I'm curious. I want to kind of talk about the Mac story, but I wanted to ask you: did you have another character that you did his bit with before
Uh-huh.
he did? Okay. And did you use Buford with that as well,
I
or
did.
was Buford later on?
Buford came along in that era. I got
Okay.
talked to Verna about making Buford for me. So Buford was made by Verna Findley. And that connection, of course, was with the Ventriloquist Convention. So Buford came first, and he was kind of the opposite. As a ventriloquist, you generally are going to use that high nasally voice with your, especially since I was using a very standard ventriloquist character. Then it seemed natural to have another character where I would use a different vocal range. And so Buford, of course, is more of that dopey Mortimer Snerd voice. And, kind of similar even in personality, though he's a dog. And so it just seemed natural to have the contrast between the two. And then it was about a year later that Aunt Tilly came into the act. And,
oh wow!
And then she's really become the favorite among most people, certainly among older audiences. I'm in my office here, and I have this picture that this was a picture.
Oh wow!
That was my costume my first year working at Kings Island. So I don't know how well, it's kind of the reflection.
Are you guys, is that matching outfits?
It's matching outfits. Now, I didn't actually come up with the matching outfits. That's what Kings Island came up with. And that's pretty much the wardrobe that they gave us. So that was back when I had hair. So, but yeah, that's the Craig Lovick figure. And his name was Otis.
That's great.
So,
wow. So neat. So Kings Island found you through.
Oh, I auditioned.
Oh, you auditioned. Okay.
Yeah, and that was a dream to work at Kings Island. Like, when I would go there as a kid and I would watch the shows and see the performers, I just thought this would be the coolest place in the world to work.
Were you kind of worried about oh, if I get it, do I have enough material, or have you done enough shows that you felt prepared to take on that responsibility as a performer there?
I think I was naive.
Yeah.
and optimistic, and
it's a good combo.
Yeah, it's what happens.
Yeah.
And so it developed over time, and I was grateful that there were people within the entertainment department that helped me out with things. And of course, you're with other performers. I was in the entertainment world there at Kings Island, and so you met other musicians and other people that we would collaborate on material and come up with ideas. So.
Wow, I love that. So could you talk a little bit about Mac? Because I've heard the story before, and I love the story.
Well, yeah, I'll try to. I mean, I feel like there'd probably be a lot of people that have heard the story, and I actually have put it in video form now.
Oh, great!
But yeah, was always a huge fan of the McElroy brothers ever since I went to the museum. First time I went to the museum, I was 12 years old, and of course saw Jocko the monkey and Cecil Wigglenose, and as a 12-year-old was totally captivated by these highly complex, really amazing characters, puppets, and asked the curator at that time, how do you get a hold of one of these McElroy figures? And she kind of reacted just like that, and and said, well, they don't make them anymore. They were still alive at that time, but she said, they pretty much don't do it anymore. But then they gave me a list of the current figure makers, and that's actually how I found Craig Lovick.
Oh, wow.
And that figure was just simply one that I could afford, and even that barely afford. At that time, I had to ask family to, help me out in order to purchase that figure. So that's the backdrop to that story. And it was years and years later that in 2001, that a woman came up to me after I had done a performance at a show, or done a performance at a church, I should say, told me that her grandfather was a ventriloquist and that she now had the puppet that he used in his act. Of course, I never suspected that what she had would be a McElroy, but I asked her some questions about it and said, do you know anything about who made this thing? And she said, well, I think my grandfather might have said that it was made by a couple of brothers. And of course, then I was like, really?
Yeah.
So I said, okay, tell me more. And I asked her, so does it have lots of complex movements on it? Like, does the hair stick up and the tongue stick out, the ears wiggle? And she said, yeah, he does all that. So then I thought, okay, this has to be a McElroy.
Yeah.
And then I proceeded to tell her all about the McElroys. And I told her that it was incredibly valuable, that, there would be collectors out there that would love to, have this figure. And I said, I would love to have him, but I'll be honest with you, if I had him, I would perform with him. I would put him into my act. That would be a dream come true for me. And so I said, I'd love to see it. And she said, well, come on by tomorrow. And I went there the next morning, and she had him sitting out on the sofa. And of course, when I walked in and saw him, I knew immediately that this was, in fact, a McElroy.
Right.
And I actually started to cry. Like, I was just so kind of overwhelmed by the moment.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like a dream.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then she was, and I had said to her the night before, okay, if what you have is a McElroy, I may very well wet my pants. That's what I said to her. And so when I reacted the way that I did, she said, so are you going to wet your pants? And I said, well, thankfully no, but this is really amazing to see this, and you've taken very good care of it. Your grandfather obviously took very good care of it. It's really in one of the best shape. It's in the best condition for a McElroy for its age that I've seen, except for maybe Cecil. So she said to me, like, this was the really amazing moment. She said to me last night as I was driving home, she said, I had a little conversation with God. And she said, God specifically told me that he has been saving this guy for you. So I was just,
wow.
I was just completely
choked up.
blown away. Yeah, more than choked up. I think I was quite touched. So I said, well, here's the deal. I would love to pay you for him. And I would love to pay you what he's worth, but I'll be honest with you, I probably can't afford what David Copperfield could pay you, or, some other people that were, paying top dollar for these.
Right.
But we negotiated a price that was affordable for me and was acceptable for her. And so, but she said, really, more than anything, I just want you to have him because I know that you are going to carry on my grandfather's legacy, which is why even if somebody came up to me and offered me $1 million for this guy, I would, I couldn't do it, because the gift from the Lord was the opportunity for me to be able to use this guy in performance, which has just been magical. And he's a huge challenge to you.
Yeah, and you pull it off. I mean, so well. I mean, it's especially with the fact that you have him and then you have Buford, and you're going back and forth and keeping all of that. Was the adjustment from, now you were using your Lovick figure before him, is that correct? Yeah. Was the transition from the Lovick to him a challenge, and how did that How did that kind of come
Well,
into play? How much?
of course it was. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, it was a challenge. Not the least of which is, the McElroy has the thumb control for the mouth, and my Lovic is index finger.
Oh, wow.
So I had to, completely just get used to that.
Right.
But I was highly motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife was kind of stunned because she had never really seen me so earnest in practice. Uh, you know, um, Prior to that, I would maybe just practice a little bit, kind of work out some new material. I'd practice in the car, like just thinking through the material, not so much manipulation and all of that.
Sure.
But I was very earnest about getting this down, and it was just fun for me to play with him. I was like a kid.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
So all of his movements worked and everything?
Yes, all except the winker, which needed a spring. The spring had broken. But with the McElroys, everything's rods.
Yeah.
And so if I pulled the lever to make him wink, the winker would stay down. But because it's a rod, you could push the lever back up, and the winker would go back up. So
Oh, wow.
So technically, it still worked. It just you want to fix that so that the lever returns where it's supposed to when using that. You wouldn't want to accidentally push the lever and then he's winking and you don't even know it. You know what I'm saying? So
Right, completely. Did you ever find out what the previous owner had, like, the performance, what he used it for, or
oh yeah, I
type of
totally
shows or anything?
totally knew that. Matter of fact, I've got pictures around here I could even show you. So the performer was Wayne Fernelius.
Okay.
That was this gal's grandfather, and he did safety programs, and so he used him, and his name was Jerry McSafety. Now, if you go to the ventriloquist, if you go to the Bent Haven Museum, you'll see there's a couple of pictures in there of Wayne Fernelius with Jerry McSafety. But I have, hang on, let me see if I think I have it right over here. I'll grab it.
Okay.
I'll be right there.
Oh, fantastic.
So I actually put this notebook together because I took him to the Antiques Roadshow. I had the opportunity to go to the Antiques Roadshow, and I didn't actually end up being one of the featured people on the Antiques Roadshow, but which was fine. It was just a fun experience. I'm a big fan of the Antiques Roadshow on PBS.
Yeah.
Do you even know what
I'm talking about? Okay. I do. Yeah, I've seen it. Yes. Yeah. It's a great series.
So I put together this notebook, and that's Wayne, and of course Jerry McSafety, and I still have the outfit too. That's in a plastic bag up here. I could show you that, but then I have a few things in here. There are these postcards that. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm so used.
Yeah, we can see them better now.
I'm so used to Zoom where it's a mirror image, and this is like an opposite. So anyway, let's see. Yeah, there's postcards.
Wow, that's great.
And I've got a couple. This is a really fun story. I learned about this gal. So the daughter of this girl, had this newspaper article, and she found me somehow. But that's actually how Jerry McSafety was dressed when he came from the Brothers, which totally makes sense. That's definitely an outfit that he would be wearing. That's how the Brothers would have dressed him. Now, Wayne Fernelius actually put, and let's see, that's not Wayne. Yes, it is. He actually put this little safety harness thing on him. But other than that, that's how he was dressed. So he obviously dressed him as a policeman in the future. But there was a contest of 25,000 names for the dummy. Hers was the best. And so this girl right here, and let me see how old she was. 14 years old. She's the one that came up with the name Jerry McSafety.
Wow.
So isn't that a fun little story? And so this newspaper article is dated 1938. And so seeing how he's dressed and knowing that, you know, this was how he first got his name, I think that's pretty good indication that that would have been the year he was built, 1938.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking 37 or 38, but it's probably reasonable to base it on this article, because of this article, that he was built in 1938. So,
wow, that's amazing. Someone commented, who helped you fix Mac, and did Mac ever need a repaint or touch-ups?
Yes. So initially, Ken Groves, I called him up and told him about this find, and and Ken and I got together in his shop. Ken is very mechanical. He fixes cars all the time, and is a great friend. And so Ken and I got together, and we did some just kind of touch up on the mechanics. The cradle was okay, so you know what I mean when I say cradle.
I do. You might have to translate that terminology.
Yeah. So inside the McElroy, in the body, there's a metal holder that actually holds the head in place. And so the cradle was just basically loose. It had gotten, over the years, it had just gotten sloppy. And so it was just kind of, it needed to be tightened up. And Ken Groves had an arc welder and, you know, the capacity to do that kind of work. And so we were able to fix the cradle up, and then also install the spring for the eyelid and that sort of thing. But then after a couple of years, I talked to Ray Gwill, and I always saw Ray as the guy to go to. Ray is just an amazing artisan, incredible skill as a figure builder, and amazing talent as a painter. You know, there's good reason that Jimmy Nelson regularly had Danny O'Day in Ray Gwill's shop, because Ray was just amazing at what he did. And so Ray and I became really close friends. And I knew that because Ray he's a busy guy, was a busy guy, and had a tendency to take his time, that if I was going to have him work on Mac, I might need to just kind of stay there until he's done.
Right.
And so I would spend a week. This happened at least twice, where I would spend a week with him. And then this way, Ray knew he had a week.
Give him some incentive to get cracking. Yeah,
exactly. Because he knew that I was going to be leaving in a week, and I had shows to do. And it's not like I had a backup at that point. And I still don't have a backup. Like, you know, Mac is it. So that's when Mac really, well, Ray was just really able to, you know, add his magic touch to Mac to get him, kind of restore him back to what I would consider to be kind of his original luster. So the paint job on him was not the original McElroy Brothers paint job. I knew that almost right away. So it had been touched up and painted over over the years. And so I knew that I wanted to get him restored so he would look very presentable on stage. So that took some time, but we got him.
So when Ray did the paint touch-ups and things, did he take, was it the whole redo of the face?
Yeah.
Wow. So he stripped it, or did you just paint? I guess you would strip it, right?
Well, some stripping is involved. Sanding. There was actually a tiny little hairline crack in his upper lip.
Oh.
And of course, I would sit with Ray when he would work on him. And so Ray would say, you know, the first thing we need to do is kind of drill this out and then fill it in so that, you know, that's repaired. And he's got this little tools, and he's, you know, and I'm just going, oh. no, no. Like I was having
Yeah.
attacks as that was happening. But, I also trusted Ray and,
Completely, yeah.
and it needed to happen. It just
Mhm,
needed to be fixed. And so there would be a few things like that. And so,
mhm. Sure.
yeah, there was some, you sand down some things, and he didn't necessarily strip him completely of the original paint, but you do have to do some sanding and kind of get it
Mhm.
prepared to
Sure.
uh, add the paint on. So,
Wow. Wow, that sounds like quite the process. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that.
well, you were particularly like this because, of course, you're a puppet builder yourself. So it
Yes.
makes sense to me that those would be the questions that you would ask.
Yeah, I love all the behind the scenes stuff
Yeah, yeah,
and the backstories for everything.
yeah.
What would you say your main audiences that you perform for are?
Great question. I would say it's become more Christian audiences, the
Okay.
church, churches. Um, it's not limited to that, but I have found that that has kind of become the niche that I
Mhm.
have just gotten into. A lot of that is because people, when they want me to come do a show, is that they do want me to include uh, how I share the gospel.
Sure.
And so that's how that's happened.
Wow.
And by God's grace, people still call. Uh,
Mhm.
nobody's called lately, but yeah, I'm always amazed that I'm still able to continue to work. And
And you've done some cruise line work as well.
yeah, well, let
Uh,
me explain that a little bit. I've never auditioned and worked for the cruise line directly.
mhm.
Cruise lines do charter groups, and that means that there will be people who will come to the cruise line and they'll say, "We've got 500 people, and we basically want to do a conference on your ship." And so, um, naturally, a cruise line will be very excited about that. And so, what happens is that they schedule times for that group to use the main showroom or specific rooms within the cruise ship
Sure.
for their presentations, for their conference content.
Mhm.
And so I've been brought on with several of these Bible teachers like Chuck Swindoll and David Jeremiah, as well as some what would be called full charter groups, working with Bill Gaither, who's in the Southern Gospel world. And they, when I say full charter, they basically charter the whole ship.
Oh wow.
And so they're providing their content, they're providing their entertainment, if you will,
Mhm.
all their content. And so I'm coming on as a part of that team. So I haven't
Okay.
been hired by the cruise director. Uh,
Right.
I'm a part of that team where I am now, doing my presentation for the people who have come on this conference uh, to get that content. Does it
Wow.
make sense?
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, and it's actually kind of the best of both because I really get to enjoy the cruise that way, and
Mhm.
um, I'm in a regular stateroom for
Sure.
people,
Sure.
and I have what's called passenger status, and so I can appreciate it. And it's also an audience that is very much invested in what's going on. If you're working for a regular cruise line, people are they can decide, well, let's see, do we go to the show tonight? I don't know. Let's go do something else, And so
Right.
it can be very fluid. But when you're a part of the conference, basically the people that are there have paid to be in this conference. And so they
Sure.
want to come to everything.
Yeah, they're invested.
They're totally invested. And
Mhm.
so the night that I'm doing my show, the full concert, if you will, my full presentation, everyone comes
Wow.
because they're invested, and
Mhm.
so that's nice. That's not always the case with variety performers on a cruise ship.
So when you're
Uh,
part of this group and they have you perform, is it just part of your show, or do you usually do your full show? Are
I
you
do
part
my
of a larger?
show, and then
Okay.
usually they ask me to do a couple of teasers or a couple little fun little bits of business during a couple of the other sessions. That helps to build anticipation for, my big show, which is often at the end of the week, kind of a big celebration. We're just going to set aside some time to just have fun, kind of thing.
Sure. So you fly all over the world for these shows?
Well, yeah.
I do. Okay, cool. Yeah. Do you have any?
Yeah.
Do you have any like flight stories? Because I know, you bring up puppets and flight, and there's always that. Could you share one with us?
Oh, sure. Well, when I travel with Mac, his head never is away from me. So his head is in a carry-on. He's priceless, and I'm certainly not going to include him in the luggage that gets, put through down underneath. But the body is too big to be in a carry-on, of course, and so that does go down under. But as you well know, a body is basically just an empty shell. And frankly, the body that I now use with Mac is not the original McElroy body. I had another body that I made so that I could keep the original in good condition.
Sure, that's a great idea. Yeah.
So there have been a couple of times. There was one time when I was like the last flight out on a Saturday, and it was because I had done a show on the East Coast and I was flying to the West Coast to do something in Oregon. And I showed up, and the pastor picked me up there, and I was going to be doing a presentation on Sunday morning. And so he did not prepare a sermon. I was going to be kind of a featured thing that was happening on Sunday morning, which seems odd that I would be doing something on a Sunday morning, but it fit in this church.
Sure.
The congregation was prepared for what that was going to be, that it was going to be something unique and special. So I showed up, but none of the characters did. Like, I had Mac, I had his head, but that's it. The airline knew where they were. They just got left somewhere, but there was no other flight coming in that night, and the characters would not arrive until 1 o'clock the next day, which is after church.
Yeah.
So I looked at the pastor, and he looked at me, and we prayed, and we said, okay, Lord, you have control over this, and you knew that this was going to happen. And so we really want to trust you. But, please grant us wisdom on how we should handle this.
Sure.
And so what we decided to do was, the next morning I stood up and I gave a little teaser that I could do, the little baby cry routine that I did, that I kind of use in the act just to kind of get things rolling. And he said to the congregation, okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to dismiss. And you can come back at 2 o'clock, and David is going to do his whole presentation then. So it kind of sprang that on the congregation. Now I'm thinking, as well as the pastor, okay, people have made plans for the afternoon. They weren't expecting this to happen.
Right.
But what actually happened is that there were more people there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon than were there in the morning. So there were people that came that were not there. And so that's where there was very much a sense that, okay, I can see the providence of God in this, that this was very much like this was God's plan all along. And this was the way that he got that accomplished.
Yeah.
So, there's nail-biting experiences. That one had, of course, a great ending. There was also a time when I traveled to Africa and the characters didn't make it. And it's just nail-biting. And especially when you're traveling overseas, you're always concerned, are things going to get lost forever? A suitcase is going to be opened back there and somebody's going to steal it because it looks valuable and so on. Thankfully, I've never lost anything permanently that way.
Right.
But it always makes you nervous. And I pray really hard when that happens. So it definitely drives you to, trust God in those situations.
Yeah. Wow. I always love to hear the hard figure flight stories because
Yeah.
they're always with the same uh, grimace behind them, but it's always interesting to hear what happens. Scott Santee commented, "Ask Dave about performing in a maximum security prison."
Oh, sure. It's fun that Scott is on. Thanks for tuning in, Scott Santee. So yeah, there's a lot of stories actually. I've been in actually now hundreds of prisons that I've had the opportunity to perform in, working with the Behind the Walls prison ministry, which was founded by Bill Glass, who was an NFL football player way back in the day, and then became basically an evangelist, a speaker, where he would travel around and kind of like a Billy Graham, if you will,
Sure.
kind of speaker. And then his focus was primarily in prisons, and he would gather around him a team of people, a lot of professional athletes or retired professional athletes, and then performers like me, where we could go in and entertain these guys, which they're desperate for any kind of entertainment, anything that's uplifting and fun.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, being in that environment, it's something that they would really long for.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, we also want to deliver the message of the gospel when we do that. So, gosh, I'm trying to think of a specific story. Scott probably has a specific story in mind that I've told him, but that's not coming to my mind right now. His son has actually been with me in jail just recently, where his son, Scott Santee's son, came along. And
For a show? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and what happens is we bring in a team of people who also are there to watch the show. But then when I'm finished, I kind of turn it over to them where they have the opportunity to interact and visit with the inmates.
Oh, great.
There was a guy that came up to me who was actually one of those guys, one of the volunteers that that said, it's good to see you again. Do you remember me? And I said, well, I'm sorry. You look kind of familiar. Remind me, where did we meet? And he said, well, we met when I was incarcerated. And so then I was, oh, tell me more. And he said, I was locked up in jail. You came and did my show, or you came and did a show. After the show was over, I came up to you and I told you that I really enjoyed the show. And at that time, you asked me if I was a Christian. And I told you yes. And then you asked me, how long have you been a Christian? And I told you about 5 minutes. So he had given his life to Christ at that presentation at the show where he was incarcerated. So he said, after I told you that, you told me that someday when I'm out of prison, I should join up and come in as a teammate to be a part of the whole program where I can now share my story with some of these other inmates. And so he said, so you're the reason that I'm here. And I just thought, okay, I don't even remember that conversation, but that's the kind of amazing things that God does in settings like that. So,
yeah.
So that's one of my favorite stories because, here's a real example of somebody who was incarcerated. You always hear about people that are like, oh yeah, jailhouse religion. Of course, they're going to turn to God when they're in jail because they're desperate. But, that's not really going to change their life. I can tell you from personal experience that I know, many people that I can point to whose lives have been absolutely transformed as a result of giving their lives to Christ, placing their faith in him and living for him in that environment, and then and sustaining that after they get released. So
Yeah.
it's
Wow.
life-changing.
Yeah. How did you get into that program?
A friend of mine who was a performer recommended me and introduced me to Bill Glass and said, you need to get this guy as a part of the team. And at the time, I was rather intimidated because I thought, okay, they're used to, in this particular program, they're used to these athletes, professional athletes, retired athletes. So, they had the guys that would come in that would do feats of strength, and like really tough guys. I'm a guy with puppets. Like, how on earth is this going to work? But what we discovered is that they were really longing for something that was fun and that just made them laugh. And so when I do programs in prisons, actually, Mac is dressed up in black and white stripes, like he's an inmate. There's also irony to that because he was originally Jerry McSafety, a policeman's outfit, and now I'm using him in black and white stripes as a jailbird, character.
Yeah.
And inmates actually get a kick out of that. I've had several people say, gosh, don't they find that to be disrespectful? But they get it. I mean, they understand the humor that, that I'm going for there. So, and connect with them.
I love that. I love that. Could we see Mac?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And then while you're getting him out, could you talk a little bit about your process for introducing a new character into your show, or maybe writing for one? I always love to hear the different perspectives on this.
Yeah, here we go.
Well, what's going on? Oh, hey, look, it's Landon Hardy. How are you, Landon?
Doing well. How are you, Mac?
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
My favorite ventriloquists.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
You know how to say it.
What?
You know how to say ventriloquist.
All right. You're one of my favorite ventriloquists.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Wow.
So, what's going on with you?
Now I'm interviewing David, as you can see.
Wow.
And we're having a good time.
Must be kind of desperate to find good people to talk to. Yeah.
I love those pearly whites. That's great.
Thank you, man.
I always loved how the McElroys, they did the teeth where they were curved a little bit. So when they did the sneer, you have that. There's beautiful craftsmanship.
Yeah.
Wow.
Why is that?
So did you ever? I'm curious. Did you ever have? Because you hear sometimes people talk about using hard figures, and typically the McElroys have kind of that, might have that magic stigma. Were you ever?
Yeah.
Did you ever kind of compete with that, or is it just because the way that your comedy was and the way you perform with them that you?
I kind of just embrace it, and I think Landon. I wouldn't necessarily expect that you would know like all the elements of my show, but one of my favorite things that I do in the show is I get a youngster up on stage, 7, 8, 9 years old. So do you know the bit that I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So, that could go in several ways, especially when you got, a guy like this, but I kind of just embrace it. And Mac actually, one of the lines is he looks at the guy and he says, "Oh, just do your."
Yeah, well, I just look at him like, you're not scared of me, are you?
And usually the kid is like, no, I'm not scared. And then of course,
hey, you ever heard of Chucky?
So that always gets a great laugh because, people are just feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that. But there's some really fun exchange that happens with youngsters. And of course, working with kids, out of the audience up on stage, is a little risky, but I love that. I love to do it because you just never know what's going to happen. Yeah. There have been a couple of times when I could tell that the kid was just a little bit too intimidated. And at least maybe twice where I had to kind of just get out of the bit and now I've learned to actually get 2 kids up on stage. Oh, okay. If one of them gets a little intimidated, I can kind of swap places. And the second kid can do some of the legwork because that bit involves, getting an object out of the audience and, handing it up to me and, hold on to it and, that whole thing.
Yes.
So I guess for those that are watching, I don't know. How many people do we have watching now? Like
we've got 34 people on.
Okay. So of the 34 people watching, it's a bit where Mac has a paper bag that I put on his head and he's going to tell this kid what the object is without looking at it. And of course, what happens is Mac turns his head around and there's a hole in the bag and he's peeking at the object. And it's just so fun because almost without fail, the kid is trying to hide the object to make sure that Mac can't see it. And then, of course, when Mac does identify the object, I'm like, that's amazing. And of course, the kid's like, no, it's not. And, well, what? Aren't you amazed by that? No. Well, why not? Well, he looked through the hole in the bag. You know? So, I just love that moment, you know, every time it happens. And it's just fun for me to get to share that with a youngster up on stage. So.
Yeah. It's a great. I've seen that bit of your show, and it's great. What I love too is that you don't overuse his specialty features in your show. You're very
well, yeah,
you use them at the right time, but you don't, you know.
I think it was probably Jeff Dunham or somebody years and years ago, because of course Jeff used a McElroy in fact.
Yes.
And I think it was him and this was before I had one, that said, you know, you can way overdo this. And so I think it's best to just, if you have, you know, this special thing that it does, just use it once.
Sure.
And then the gag's over. So that was a significant thing when I heard him say that. I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, that's what I will do.
That's awesome, and I love the white tux. It's just, and what's great about the white tux too is it makes them stand out in front of any curtain or
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and I typically wear dark colors when I'm on stage, and you know, a lot of ventriloquists do that. Do you do that, Landon? Are you intentional about what you wear when you're doing your act?
Yeah, I kind of go for the Wayland Flowers thing where you like wear all black.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wear like my show colors are like red and purple and like black. So I'll do like a purple button down and like just black slacks and that type of thing.
Nice. And how's work going for you, by the way? Like, I know you're interviewing me, but I'm curious to know. I mean, obviously, we're all in COVID-19, so none of us are working. But I mean, in terms of performances and this sort of thing, do you feel like that you feel good about the stuff that's coming in? Like, what are you doing now?
I did. I had back in October, I had done my first library showcase, and I had booked a bunch of stuff for this summer.
Yeah, great.
So that was fun, and that was a neat. Hopefully, I'll be able to. I now have those contacts, of course, to reach out to them next summer.
Yeah, so,
but it was the getting out there aspect and getting into reaching new markets and meeting new people that are in this showbiz thing, and it's been a neat opportunity. And I've been building some stuff for some people.
You build
in between all that. So
you build amazing puppets.
Thank you.
I am so impressed with the stuff that you've built, and I think you have a fantastic presence on stage and amazing skill as a ventriloquist. It's just delightful to watch you, grow up in ventriloquism. And I know that sounds, kind of funny, but I mean, you started young, and when I first saw you, it was, I don't know how many years ago, but it's just been fun to watch you kind of grow into this. And you're in your early 20s now, right? You're 20.
I'm 19.
No, you're 19. Okay. That's great.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's exciting to have these people in the industry that are seasoned like yourself to help me and to introduce me to this world of entertainment. In our comments, Mark Hellerstein said, "Hi, Landon and David." Christy Lynn said, "That is my favorite act that I've ever seen." Janice McElroy said, "Hi" from Mac's half brother. And Kay Ann Seaton said, "Kids are awesome." And then Chuck Lyons said, "David, are you coming to the convention this year?"
Oh, yes. And I think somebody else asked that. I think, maybe it was Chuck that would ask that in one of the comments. And yes, I'm planning to come. I'm registered. Got my hotel room all booked, and I'm registered, and I'm really looking forward to it. This is one of the times that I'm actually able to come. Years past, I haven't been able to come with regularity.
Sure.
It tends to be a time that these conferences, these cruise conferences happen, and those are pretty strategic for
Sure.
me to
Yeah.
go to. And so I generally have to miss the convention when I do that. But this year, there's no cruises for me anyway.
Yeah.
That I'm booked on, and so I'm able to come. And I always love coming to the convention. It's just such a fun community to be connected to.
Yeah, I do too. I wasn't able to attend last year, but I hope that they have it this year because I'll be there. So I have a few more questions wrapping up. What is your favorite memory of performing?
Oh, wow. My favorite memory of performing. Oh, gosh.
Go ahead. What?
Or maybe Max, for that matter.
Wow. Okay, let me think about that for a minute.
Sure.
And actually, there was something that I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
Not to change the subject.
That's fine.
When you were doing your interview with Mark Merchant,
yes,
you mentioned something about this lip control challenge thing. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
What is that? Tell me.
Okay.
I have not seen that. Like, I didn't know what he was talking about.
So Dennis Daniels has this lip controlled challenge, and I actually just submitted a video in today. But you just do a bunch of P's, M, or V, P's and B's, and you can copy the sentence that he uses or whatever, and then you just tag him in it, and we all share it together and get to see each other's characters that we use, and it's just kind of a fun thing that he had started.
So what's one of the phrases?
Oh,
you remember?
Yeah, I wrote it down right here. One of the phrases is the boy ate bananas, and then the other one is my brain is strained from this challenge.
Okay. What do you find to be the most difficult? Because I'll answer that in a second. And I'll try to get back to your question. I'm just
sure.
the subject to maybe let my brain ruminate on that one.
Sure, that's fine.
But what do you find to be the most difficult for you as you're performing and working on your lip control technique?
Oh, for lip control?
Yeah, well, or just in general, but specifically lip control.
Oh, well, for me, I feel like when I'm performing, I feel like my lips are just like flapping in the wind, and I have this, I'm really worried about it, even though I'm like still in the moment, and it's like a subconscious thing, but that I also kind of focus on sometimes. And then I have to go back because I record everything. And I see that I'm fine, but I'm always worried about it because I always practice so hard on that. And that was like the first thing I learned in ventriloquism is you learn lip control, and then you learn where to get your heart figure, and then it's like how to be funny is kind of the path. So I'm always worried about lip control, especially like because I do I'll do any type of show I can get basically, and I've done like church events and banquets, and then I've done like kids shows, and kids will call you out if you're a bad ventriloquist, and if you're I did a show not too long ago where they had the group of kids had seen a ventriloquist at their camp. So they already had expectations going into this, and I arrived and they're asking me stuff like, "Do you use the drawing board?"
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So I had to make some adjustments to my act. but yeah,
musical elements in your show? Do you do like songs or?
I do. I have a few songs. I do I introduced the vent mask because I feel like everyone does that, and so I thought I'd add that too, and people love it because you get to. It's kind of like having an inside joke with the crowd because you've got the crowd member up there with you, and so I do a song to that, and I have I have my older character Mervin. He sings the Ring of Fire.
Oh, nice.
And I do that for my senior and women's luncheons and things like that.
Got it. Okay.
I have him in that bit, that's so great. It works out well. Yeah, and then I've got that's right before he does his whole bit where he's trying to appeal to the women in the crowd, and so he gets out his dentures and his toupee. So it's quite prop heavy, but it's
That's great.
It's fun. Yeah, I enjoy the creative process and adding new bits to it. So
Okay, so to answer my own question about the what's the most difficult in terms of lip technique,
mhm,
when people ask me that question, what I've basically come up with it that I think is the hardest thing to do is anytime that there's um, a difficult letter that is combined with R, like for example, French fry, anything with R, or even the BR sound or the PR sound, like all there's the the B's and P's, we all know that.
sure.
But then kind of once you get that down, that's one level. But then when you add the R, brown, then that to me makes it much more tricky. And I was just wondered if you found that to be the case.
That's exactly. I didn't think about that when you had asked me that question, but I can totally relate to that statement.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do the letter substitution, or have you found your own way around that, or?
No, I pretty much do the letter substitutions.
Okay,
So, but I think it's just, it has to do with how you're using your tongue on your hard palate to,
mhm,
create that plosive sound. And so,
sure, sure. Well, do you have were you able to think of a fun, maybe a fun performance or something where something stuck out and it made it memorable for you?
uh, well, I've had the opportunity to perform, like I said before, in
Mhm,
prisons,
yeah,
and you go into a situation like that or a setting like that, and you're hoping to be a blessing to these people. And of
sure.
course, what happens is that you're the one that is really blessed in that situation. I
Yeah.
actually performed on death row, and that was an incredibly intimidating situation because you hear all kinds of stories, and these are people. Every single one of them there are guilty of murder,
Yeah.
uh, and a lot of times on death row, they won't actually let them all be together in one place to see a
Mhm,
presentation. They consider that to be too high a risk, uh, and they just don't want to deal with that. But this was death row in Texas, and they actually brought them out. I'm trying to think how many. There was probably about 20 guys that were all in the room, and so I did my show. They laughed. You really have to think through, even like jokes with Aunt Tilly, this sort of thing. I'm thinking through all the references in my act or any jokes that might have any reference to death. It's
yeah.
amazing how all of a sudden you're doing some editing in your head when you're in an environment where you think, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't do that here. you know.
Right.
Um, but when I was done, there was a group of guys, I think about 6 guys, that said, now we've prepared something for you. And they did a gospel song in 6-part harmony that they
Wow.
sang. And it was just not just to me, it was to the other volunteers that had come in with us.
Mhm,
And I just remember thinking, okay, my life is so incredibly rich that I get to experience things like this. I don't know very many people who have ever been on death row.
yeah.
Uh, that's number one. And then number two, to have had this situation where here's a group of guys that are probably in the worst place you could possibly be in the world, arguably.
Right.
And yet this particular group of guys were thoughtful enough to actually put something together and to do a gospel song. And it was like an old spiritual,
Mhm,
someday when I cross over. I don't remember the song, but it's,
mhm,
someday when we cross over that the river and we
right.
get to the other side. It's that kind of spiritual. And of course, it was just so moving. And I sat there thinking, okay, I am so fortunate and blessed to get to do what I do,
Yeah.
um, and to have the opportunity to be in this kind of environment, which is such a paradox because one would think, okay, who on earth wants to actually on purpose go to that situation? But it was unbelievable just what a blessing that was. So that comes to my mind when you ask me that question.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's
Wow.
always great when you feel like the audience is just totally with you, and
Hmm.
that's exciting, and
Yeah.
feels very affirming. I
Yeah.
think
In the moment energy.
it was Jeff Galtz that made the comment among the 2.5 hours that interview with you, where I mean, I listened to some of it and watched it. It was fun to see Jeff. Jeff is in my city. He lives in Indianapolis, but I never see
Oh,
him.
cool.
And we have talked about how we live in the same city. We should, I should get together or something. And I was reminded
Hmm.
that that's just we've never really done that. And Jeff is a
Yeah.
club performer. The comedy club is not my scene.
Right. Well, a little different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've been in a couple comedy clubs. They're a challenge for sure.
Mhm.
And I'm not trying to say it's bad or whatever. I'm just saying it's not my
No, no, it's just a different
yeah,
different
totally.
beat to it. Yeah.
But anyway, Jeff said something about and when he did his performance, he got addicted. That he took the drug.
Hmm.
He was using that as a metaphor.
Right.
And that does happen. When you're a performer and you're on stage, there is something that's very special about the audience response. And
Mhm.
this is where too I have, just like most performers, there's always situations where you think you're flying high, but then you just bomb on stage, and that brings you back to earth.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
realize that okay, um, we're capable of bombing, and it's exciting when there's a great show, but then you just never know. It
Yeah.
could go.
Well, there's a plethora of elements that go into making the perfect show or breaking it.
Yeah,
And so, any one thing out of line could just, yeah.
yeah,
Um, could you to maybe the newbie vent watching or
sure.
someone that maybe needs coaching on their writing, could you share kind of your advice for writing for a character? Or maybe kind of a foundation on where to start?
I'm the one that needs coaching in my writing. Um, so there's lots of elements that go into humor writing, and
Mhm.
there's lots of great books that are out there. Okay, so now I'm trying to call up one. Any Let's see. Huh, wow. So basically, you have to get to it. You,
Mhm.
the main thing, and I'm sure Landon, you're very aware of this, is that when you write, it's fine if you write something that is incredibly wordy, but then you have to have the discipline to start taking out what is not necessary, and you have to
Yes.
get to the funny.
Mhm.
And that's a challenge for me because I can tend to be verbose on stage, and I kind of like long setups. To me, that's kind of just fun. Uh,
Mhm.
but the key to good comedy writing is honing your setup and then getting to the punchline as quickly as you can, as elegantly as you can. Meaning,
Mhm.
with no, you got to trim out all the fat.
Sure.
So, in terms of practical advice, I would say find people that are good at it, and then befriend them. There's a buddy of mine, his name's John Branyan, who's a brilliant comedy writer. And John will tell you, because people have said, how did you and David Pendleton meet? And John will tell you, it's because David came up to me and he said, will you be my friend? I hope that it didn't sound that desperate. But the point is, the point is, there are some people that are just really, really talented at joke writing and comedy writing, and there's a lot to be learned
Sure.
from people like that. I frankly don't consider myself to be one of those people. That's what I'm telling you.
Okay.
Um, I consider myself to be more of a technician,
Mhm.
um, in terms of, I do feel like that I have fairly decent skills as a
Sure.
ventriloquist, in terms of voicing and speaking without moving my lips, that
Mhm.
those kinds of skills, as well as puppetry and everything that's involved with
Mhm.
creating a character that is believable on stage.
But I do like how you talk about the importance of having someone to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, because that's it's part of the writing process, and sometimes I've had instances where I'll be thinking one way, and then someone I'm talking to will say, well, what if you took that and then moved it here, or what if you said this with it, or what if just totally delete that, put this
Yeah.
in there, and I go, oh yeah, that works.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's
Jeff Dunn said a couple of years ago at the convention, he was talking about comedy writing, and what he said was absolutely true, that as ventriloquists, we're not typically writing the same way as a stand-up comedian is going to write, where it's going to be where we're talking about ourselves, and we are doing the traditional setup, punch, tag. That's pretty much
right.
The flow or the format of a stand-up comedian. For us, we're more of a sitcom because it's characters and it's conversation, and
there's conflict.
There's conflict that you're trying to create. Yes. And so you have to think of it in those terms. It can make it a challenge, actually, if you go to stand-up comedians, which, John Branyan is a stand-up comedian. Robert G. Lee is a stand-up comedian. Most of the funny guys that I go to, that I look to for help, have to also shift in their own mind that, oh yeah, we're not writing for a stand-up comedy act, but what we're writing for is more like a sitcom. It's dialogue based.
Sure.
And so I thought that was profound and a very simple way of putting it when Jeff said, we actually have the opportunity to do a sitcom on stage.
Sure.
That stand-up comedians basically don't have that advantage.
Yeah, that's a great quote. So in wrapping up, what do you hope to see from the future of ventriloquism and from future events?
I actually am a big fan of classic ventriloquism.
Okay.
And you can tell when you see my act. It looks like something from the Ed Sullivan Show. Some people, they roll their eyes at that. But I think there's a whole generation of people they're basically unexposed to that. And so I actually would like to see more traditional ventriloquists. I know that's crazy because, everybody else is talking about, oh, we need to be more fresh and original. And of course that is true. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that, we should just all go out and do, a bunch of old stale material. But I guess I really still enjoy a good classic style. Bob Newhart.
Sure.
His style never got old, and he was brilliant as a comic. He wasn't so much a stand-up comedian as he was a comic. He had great comic bits that he did. His stuff that he did as a solo on stage, where it was him on the phone, and you didn't hear who was on the other end, but you could tell what they were saying by the way he was responding, and he kind of had that halting way of speaking. That's just great classic stuff. And comedians nowadays feels like that they're trying to be so avant-garde.
Sure.
I would like to see more ventriloquists actually do, of course, original and fresh, but in a way that
performed in a classic style.
Yeah, that there's just, I want to see more classic ventriloquists. And I think a lot of times they give into the pressure from from stand-up comedians who kind of roll their eyes and they're like, oh yeah, that's so old school.
Right.
But I think other comedians are saying that, but I don't think audiences are saying that. The response that I get from audiences is, this is so refreshing. And I totally recognize that what I'm doing is a very classic ventriloquist act. I'm not trying to be, you know, the stand-up comedy guy.
Right.
I'm actually doing a ventriloquist act. And I like to see that.
I
So
love that. That's great. That's I love that so much.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I just, you know, all like Sammy King, you know, I hear you refer to Sammy King. I mean, good grief.
Yeah.
That was a ventriloquist act. That was a
Mhm.
profoundly funny, and you know, his best act was what, 12 minutes long.
Yeah.
And he did it for years and years in Las Vegas, and it never got old. So I kind of look to that as it gives me hope.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great. So if people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
If they want to find out more about me, why
Yes.
does anybody want to find out more about me? Well, my website is anythingcantalk.com.
Fantastic.
And I've been around, thankfully, long enough and got, you know, on the internet early enough that if you just Google David Pendleton ventriloquist, then, you know, you'll see stuff that will pop up. But my website is near the top when you do that. And you'll also see some YouTube videos from my performances. And I have an old DVD that's like way dated now. It's like over 15 years old. But you know, I need to produce something else now that can replace that. But that's on my website if you're interested. So
awesome. Fantastic. Well, David Pendleton, thank you, and Mac. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Landon.
Thank you guys so much for being a part of this interview.
We're big fans of you, Landon.
Oh, well, thank you. And I yours. You guys are absolutely amazing. And to all the rest of your cast, David, thank you. Thank them as well for everything that they contribute to their show. And thank you guys for tuning in. This was a great interview, and I'll also upload this on YouTube. And so it'll always be there. Awesome. Thank you guys so much, and take care.
Good
Bye-bye.
seeing you, Landon. Bye.